Welcome to the CollectingCars.com podcast with Chris Harris and Edward Lovett.
Hello and welcome to another Collecting Cars podcast. Now you might hear some peripheral noise, background noise here, because we're recording at Goodwood today with Sam Hancock, who is actually at Hancock_Sam.
Yep.
is both his Twitter and Instagram handle, and Edward Lovett, who's at Edward Lovett. Now we're down here because Sam is pretty much permanently based here because he's so embedded in this historic car racing world, and we have another guest that we're going to record as well later on, whose surname is Nadell. You might have heard of him, first name Tiff. So thanks for coming along, Sam.
Pleasure.
Now we've got many things we can discuss because you are so well embedded in this historic racing world now. I don't think I ever go to a circuit where there's a meeting on where you aren't present. You seem to be omnipresent everywhere. So can you just tell us a little bit about how you ended up becoming so embedded in this world? I mean,
Yep.
it must be great for you because clearly it's your passion and you've turned your passion into your livelihood, which is a wonderful thing to do, isn't it?
And that was always the dream, you know, and I was one of those kids that grew up with crazy dreams of, you know, Formula One World Championships and da-da-da. And as I climbed the ladder up from karting and then single-seaters, like so many of us, reality descends, and it's half a reality check on talent and large reality check on budget. And
the viewer can't see this, but you're a tall bloke. And frankly, that doesn't help, does it?
I use that as an excuse
Yeah,
often. I tell myself pretty much on a nightly basis that if I wasn't 6'2", I'd definitely have 3 world championships under my belt by now. But no, I kind of, you know, I was hell bent on F1, and I grew up around racing because my dad raced at club level in classic Formula 4 2000 as a hobby, and you know, most weekends were spent on the grass bank at Brands watching Dad.
Did you resent that, or do you now think it was a cool thing to have done?
What, to grow up watching?
Yeah, because I think we all had fathers whose hobbies probably defined our social lives. My father was into cricket and hockey, so I spent most of my formative years sitting on the boundary watching him not take wickets. Yeah. and a bit of me thinks I could have been doing something else. Yeah. What about you?
No, so I was the opposite, and thank God my dad wasn't into cricket, because I would have definitely been thinking I want to be doing something else. No, I loved every second of it, and I remember having a conversation probably over a very greasy burger at the van at Brands with Dad and a mate, probably about 8 years old or something, and they said, you know, what do you want to do when you're old? And I said, well, I'm going to be doing this. Maybe we were watching the Formula Ford Festival or something at the time. I said, I'm going to be a racing driver. And there's something very powerful about a child's naivety. And I remember, especially Dad's mate, who's been a great supporter and is a good friend, but even he sort of said, yeah, but you know, that's quite a big deal. You've really got to devote your whole life to that, and you know, lots of money, and how are you going to do that? And these kind of conversations kept happening as I was getting a bit older and into my early teens. And it just wasn't a single other thing on the planet that I either wanted to do or could imagine myself doing.
So you did karting, single-seaters. Then what was your first tin tops? Porsches, or was it something before that?
My first tin top was a complete blag, actually. That's right, so my sort of single-seater career petered out. I'd won a few races. I did a bit of Formula Vauxhall Junior, and then the Formula Palm Rowdy thing. I don't know if you remember that. It was sort of an equivalent.
I did one of those.
Did you?
Yeah.
It was brilliant. It was Jonathan Palmer's creation, and he basically said, look, racing in the junior category is getting too expensive, and there's no way of telling who's really the best driver because everyone's cheating with engines in F3 and da-da-da. We're going to create an affordable single-make championship where there's only one team. It's the organisation. That's the team. Drivers either win or they don't. And that was brilliant because
Was that the original series you did? The first series?
Yeah, so I did the first, or half the first year, maybe all of the second year.
There was some big... So it was Justin Wilson, all that lot?
Justin Wilson, Darren Turner, Robbie Kerr... I mean, crikey, there were loads. Alan Simonson, which is obviously sad, very sad. Jerome Bleekemolen.
Yeah, there was some
serious
names, weren't there?
Yeah, it was great, and it gave a lot of us who had sort of cobbled the dosh together to maybe do the first rung of the ladder, Formula Ford, or in my case, Vauxhall Junior. You know, and I was very lucky because you could never have done it without family's help. But whilst Mum and Dad could afford to help me do maybe year 1 of Oxford Junior, maybe a bit of year 2 of whatever came next.
It wasn't
but
sustainable.
That was going to be it.
Yeah.
And Palmer Audi came along. It was great. I learned about marketing as well, because it was sort of, I think it was 80 grand a year, which when you compare that to budgets today at that level, it's that's a fifth at least, maybe a sixth of what drivers need today. And Jonathan Palmer understood sponsorship and marketing, so he built in a really simple but really nice hospitality facility and nice branding and good telly. And I wrote my first ever sponsorship proposal. Actually, the first ever one I wrote was in pencil on lined paper when I was in karting, but I had to update it for Palmer Audi, and sold weekend by weekend to different sponsors. And I had a building company covering the car one weekend with 20 guests in the tent, and then I had, I think with the help of some friends, Fujitsu Siemens on the car the next weekend with 50 guests in the tent, and it was just enough to kind of make up the shortfall from obviously parents' funding, but it taught me a bit about marketing in motor racing,
and that it's much more about what you're doing outside the car, sadly, isn't it? At that level, you have to assume you're going to perform in the car, because you wouldn't be there otherwise. Yeah. But you've got to work flipping hard out of the car.
You do.
To keep it going.
You definitely have to do that. But I actually look back with the benefit of hindsight and think I spent too much time and energy worrying about the marketing side. Because at the time it seemed to me that all the chat, all the magazines and all the documentary, everything you watch and the people you speak to, it's like, you've got to be good with the sponsors. You've got to be good on the marketing side. You've got to be presentable. And there wasn't enough emphasis on, well, actually, if you're basically the next Senna, look at Kimi Räikkönen at that similar sort of era. He came out of karts having dominated. He did a single year of Formula Renault, blitzed everybody, and went straight into F1. And so there wasn't enough emphasis on the fact that actually, do be good at the marketing stuff, but you know what? Talent.
Yeah.
Be
quick. Be quick.
Nothing shouts louder than smashing the opposition, does it?
Exactly.
So you and then you went from there.
That's right. So start from the beginning. So a bit of club level karting, Camberley Kart Club, Blackbush. I was always either a bit too fat or a bit too tall, but I won a few races at club level and did a bit of British Championship stuff. Vauxhall Junior thing was when I started. I started to figure it out, and I had the first couple of podiums. Palmer Audi was first wins, and then from there, I had no money. I went to America. Yeah. I went to try to ply my trade in the States, and I said to Mum and Dad, I was 20, and I said, right, can you just buy me a one-way ticket to Daytona, to Orlando? And I'm not coming home until I've figured it out. And ended up doing a bit of the Barber Dodge Pro Series out there. That was a disaster. Really quick in winter testing, and then I think I had someone that came from preparing horse and carriage as my mechanic. So that didn't last very long.
So when did you realise, this is the tough question, when did you realise that you weren't going to be Kimi Räikkönen? Or when did you accept it?
The first time that thought ever entered my head was the evening after I won a race, and someone very close to me was getting all excited, and they said, "Thing is, though, you're obviously not a Senna, so we've got to figure out how we're going to do it." And I was like, "What? What do you?" Yeah, I never thought about that. I mean, obviously, he was absolutely right, and but it's like I said earlier, there's something wonderfully powerful about a teenager's naivety. Yeah. It just doesn't occur to you that you can't be the same as your heroes, the guys you've read about and watched all the videos and hung on their every word. So that was the first time I thought, okay, maybe it's going to be a bit harder than
So then
I
what
thought.
you have to do is you have to think about how do I continue to have a working life in this world of cars? Yep. And I think that's what we've all done.
Yep, exactly.
I quickly realised I wasn't going to be certain things, and I just thought, I want to be around cars. Exactly. I love cars, old and new. What can I do to be among them? And so you've carved your niche now. I
had a few years of really scrabbling around, to be honest. So after the Palmer Audi thing, I did a bit part season in the Barber Dodge Pro Series in the States, which didn't come to anything. And then I looked to sports cars, and I had a little bit of money left over and a little bit of sort of promised help financially, and I just banged on the door of every single sports car team I could think of. Again, completely naive. When I think of the doors that I was banging on back then as a complete unknown, it's kind of embarrassing, like straight to the factory teams. Hello, you should think of me. Can I please have a test? And just being a real pain, and actually not realising at the time that I was being a real pain.
But that's the way
just
it worked.
Wanted something.
You
to
weren't the only one
shift.
doing that, though, were you? That's the way it worked.
You've got to do it. And in the end, Kramer Racing, Erwin Kramer, which now means everything to me as a name and their history. And I learnt, but at the time, I wasn't into historic racing at all. I only cared about modern stuff. And Erwin Kramer replied to, I think it was email then, I'm quite old, maybe it was just a phone call, but he replied at last minute. He obviously was running out of money. There was sort of a couple of days left before the first race. And he said, if you can bring X, I'll stick you in the car at Barcelona this weekend. And this was an LMP1 or LMP 900 or whatever it was called at the time. Lola, B2K10 or something, I can't remember, B9810 or something, with a Roush V8 and sort of 650 horsepower, slicks wider than anything I'd ever seen in my life, and no testing. So he said, bring a bit of change, pay me something, and you'll be driving with Ralph Kellner's of Le Mans factory Toyota driver, famed from the GT1 era, at Barcelona on Thursday. And I thought, okay, all right, yeah, sure, Erwin, yeah.
So how did it work out?
It was the biggest revelation of my racing life in terms of understanding the difference between low-level cars and high-level cars. And it's what I'm telling all my clients in the historic racing world today. Don't be afraid of these high-level quick racers, because they're built to do that lap time. And yes, they've got more power than you're used to. They've got bloody great big tyres and bloody great big wings. And you know what? They're really well made and everything just works. And it took me... I remember standing in the back of the truck getting changed as they were warming the car up before I drove it for the first time, and honestly having a little private moment with myself, because it was kind of scary. That noise, just the engine sounded so vicious. And then it took me one corner of the outlap to realise that this thing was just mega. Just, the gearbox was so easy, so smooth. The brake pedal was so effective but rock solid. There was no play in anything. The way the car turned was in direct proportion to your steering inputs. Yeah. And actually, when you started to lean on it, it just had a whiff of understeer that you could just peel out of the throttle to cure, and I loved it. And within 2 or 3 laps, I just thought, this is a bit of me.
I'm a driving god.
I'm so good. Not at all. I think the rate at which other people were passing me was enough to keep those thoughts in check. But the point is, it didn't take long, and actually having someone like Ralph Kellner's alongside me. Remember, this is the first time I've ever shared a car. Single seaters, you're on your own, so there's always an excuse. So and so's car or setup's better than mine. No hiding when you've got a teammate. You've got a teammate, so you've got a direct benchmark. He was brilliant. He's still a mate. We both work for Eurosport doing the Le Mans commentary, and Ralph was helpful. And frankly, I don't think I was far off at all, if at all. By the time the race came, we'd had practice and qualifying. I think I was where I needed to be, and I led a few races that year. The Roush was woefully unreliable, but I drove in that first year on next to no money with Ralph Kellner's and Jean-Marc Gounon, who was like fresh out of Formula One and Mercedes sports car fame, and you just inhale all this knowledge, and they were good fun as well, so that was great.
Did you do the full season?
I did. What did I do? I think it was a 6-round championship, and maybe I did 4 races, something like that.
Mega.
And
did you have to bring any money for the second race?
Oh yeah. But it was pennies, and compared to what they wanted and needed. And that's kind of been the story of all the times of my career, is basically just about ground to a halt. It's been teams that were absolutely in the shit financially, with the bailiffs banging on the door, that they suddenly say, okay, you kind of got an appropriate CV, or somebody said you can kind of string a lap together, if you can just bring what you said.
You're a bloody ambulance chaser, aren't you? You spot the ones. It's a bit like being in the nightclub at 3 a.m, spotting the drunk one in the corner, isn't it? Am I allowed to say that on the podcast? I'm probably not.
It's probably you, Chris.
I had a similar, exactly the same situation. I think it was 2 years later, so sort of 2003. I was 23 years old. And it really had ground to a halt. And I was working for a mate of mine, flogging hospitality packages just to earn some dosh and pay the bills. And we needed some tickets for Le Mans for this company that wanted to take a bunch of guests. And I couldn't get the pit access I needed that they wanted. And I said to my buddy Vincent Franceschini, who has a company selling those things now and used to own a Formula 3000 team. God, it would be so much better if I was just racing in the frickin' race so that we could get the pit passes. And he said, well, why don't we try? And he was great. And I thank Vincent because he got on the phone and he called everyone, and I called everyone I knew. And Courage, which was a factory team based at Le Mans with loads of history.
And crucially French. Crucially
French. And they just designed and built a brand new LMP2 car. But they had next to no money, and they were happy to take someone on a... I mean, when I say last minute, this was probably a week before the Le Mans 24 Hours. I think even the...
You didn't have to do pre-quali because you'd already done enough laps there, had you?
I can't... No, no, that's right. I had been to Le Mans. I'd been to Le Mans 2 years earlier.
Don't you have to have done 4 laps?
So now it's a lot more involved. So back then you just had to complete, I think, 3 night laps and maybe 4 or 5 laps in the daytime. Now you've got to do the simulator tests to learn about traffic and the different speeds of the different categories, and it's much more complicated. But back then, you could kind of blag it, and they needed money, anything, and we did a deal and sort of wrote all this stuff into the contract about advertising space on the car, and I want this, that, and the other, and I knew
paddock passes,
yeah, all of that, and I knew exactly sort of what I was writing in, and in terms of like branding space. I got down there and chucked a load of stickers on the car, and off we went. And that turned out to be a really good chassis, the Courage LMP2. Again, I was with Jean-Marc Gounod, and I got...
Did it finish?
Great. Didn't finish, but we were quick. We led the class for quite a long time, yeah. That is my Le Mans history. I've been there 7 times. I've never finished. I crashed once, and I've had teammates crash, and all the other times, engine failure.
Yeah, I'm getting like that with Spa. I've done 4 Spas now, and I've never finished. And I never will. I know I'll keep going back. I've never finished the Spa 6-hour classic either with the Frankel brothers.
Really? I thought you did last time.
Well, I mean, it got across the line, but I don't think you really count it to finish. It probably spent an hour in the pits at some point.
So, Sam, we're talking about raising money to race. How does that relate today at Le Mans, at the high end, and even Formula 1 at the bottom end?
It's good and bad. So, I mean... The problem is that the sums of money needed today are so outrageous that it's hard to justify even starting to make an effort.
What's the seats? If you turn up for an arrive and drive in an LMP2 car, 1 seat.
At Le Mans for the whole year?
For Le Mans.
So if you're a gentleman driver and you want to buy a seat, you need £1 million.
Yeah.
Which is outrageous, but that's what it is.
But that's not just to do the one race, because you have to do some of the ALMS or ELMS to...
I think it's £1 million for that weekend, isn't it?
It's £1 million for the whole Le Mans project. So you probably get a test or 2 days out of that. You get the official test day out of that, and all the governance that goes with it. So you get your little motorhome in the paddock and your race suit and your tickets for your mates and da-da-da. But
quite expensive.
It's quite expensive.
Yeah.
But that's £1 million for a team that's planning this financially to go.
But there are very few mugs there now. Everyone that's going there. The kind of garageista thing doesn't exist anymore, does it?
There's very few gentleman drivers in LMP2, and thankfully they've still got GTE AM as a class because Le Mans' entire history, in fact, the start of Le Mans is gentleman drivers.
Yeah.
And I do kind of roll my eyes a little bit when you hear people, observers, fans, even commentators pouring scorn on the performance of some gents at Le Mans, because I'm sorry, but that is Le Mans. This event that we all love wouldn't exist if it weren't for the Bentley boys back in the day. And they were all, in the end, very accomplished drivers, but they were gentlemen drivers. This wasn't a pro event.
And the sport would collapse long term if it wasn't for those people.
Yeah, and sports car racing, if you look around the world, all the stuff that you're doing in GT3, Blancpain and the countless other GT championships, and we've got a successful World Endurance Championship, we've got a very successful European Le Mans Series, we've got Asian Le Mans Series, IMSA things sort of pretty much doing good things.
Never been healthier, has it?
And it's thanks to the quantity of gentleman drivers that are funding these privateer teams, because remember there's only a few factory teams with big corporate budgets, and it's thanks to the gentleman drivers wanting and needing to employ pros as their coaches to help guide them along the way that has given so many more drivers like me a lifeline, a career lifeline. And I think when I was doing it, that was a trend that was maybe just starting, and now it's in full swing.
And it was also tin top, so what we call GTE now.
Yeah.
They were slightly sneered at, those cars back in the day, as being a bit. It was a career path that you didn't take voluntarily.
Yeah.
You'd basically exhausted all other avenues of being a racing driver, and you ended up in one of those cars. Whereas now, from quite a young age, GT3 is very attractive, isn't it?
Super
attractive. I say
attractive,
GT3, but GT3 is the stepping stone to GTE, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's now very much you identify you're not going to get into F1. Have a go at this because you can earn a good living. There's all sorts of peripheral stuff that comes with it, as you say, coaching, other activities that can earn you a living.
Yeah.
I mean, it's become a little industry, hasn't it?
If you assume the default position of the majority of young drivers that aspire to being professionals is we want to get to F1, the quantity of paid professional factory GT3 type drivers today that came out of single seaters and kind of pivoted away from that F1 dream to do the GT3 thing, and they're doing it so much earlier now as well. It's not like they're trying and failing as F1 test drivers and then sort of landing in they're sort of doing a year of entry level Formula Renault or whatever it is, and then leaping across because they know that they've got a much better chance of making a living as a paid professional. I was watching you guys from Spa and also Nürburgring 24 Hours, and just the leaderboard, the top sort of 40 cars.
You look at the names.
It's impressive, yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
I saw
they're so young as well. When you go to sign on, they all look like my children.
I saw Garage 59 is bringing back some silverware from Tokyo.
Yeah, Alex,
weekend.
Com and Goodwin had a good result.
But it was brilliant. He posted on his Instagram
Millionaires.
account with Hakkinen 3 or 4 spaces below him.
They had Mika in a 720, didn't they?
Fantastic.
So I think Alex
How cool is that?
because he bought a McLaren, didn't he?
Yeah.
He bought a McLaren F1 car, but sadly it wasn't Hakkinen. It was a Coulthard car. Not that we mind that, David, but I think he wanted his countryman's car. I want to change the subject quickly. We'll come back to that because sometimes we discuss things that have happened to us in the last week. Well, it's holiday time, so I haven't been doing an awful lot. I did a bit of work last week with Flintoff and McGuinness, which was good fun, and I ended up submerged in an estuary, but that was fine about that on the telly at a later date. But there was this incident, more than a week ago, with the Type 64, which was, I hesitate to say a Porsche. It was Ferdinand Porsche's development project sports car that he started before the Second World War, that I drove for a film that we put up on YouTube, and it was at the RM auction at Pebble Beach last weekend, and it's caused a bit of a hoo-ha. These two gents here are going to have a view on this because they're both very much in this world. So,
did you know about the car a year ago? Did you know
yes,
that car
I did,
existed?
but only because randomly it was doing the rounds and it was trying to be sold.
Yeah.
And it got put under my nose. Do you
but
know anyone?
You didn't really know it existed, like an auto union exists.
Dude, I'm a geek. I did know it existed, but that's probably not saying it's anything other than obscure because I quite like those things. So I did. I did know it existed, but most people didn't. You're quite right. So you say what happened at the auction and why it was anomalous.
Well, in terms of, I posted on this and had quite a lot of feedback from it. I personally, for a car...
Feedback code for abuse? Or?
No, a mixed abuse. Some people saying, no, he definitely said, 30, 40, 50...
Well, say what happened.
Fine. Well, in my view, for a car so heavily publicised by RM, quite rightly, because that's their job...
So we've got an auction room. Paint the picture. Be a commentator.
No, I will in a second. But they've heavily publicised a car for the last few months as their, front catalogue car for the auction at Pebble Beach.
Which in itself is quite punchy, given they had a bloody LM F1 in the same auction, didn't they?
Yep.
Correct. But they announced that car a little bit later, so this was the car they'd sort of been using for their sort of main PR. And they called it the $20 million Porsche. So why would an auctioneer open up a $20 million Porsche at $30 million? They wouldn't. And it doesn't matter for people who think they heard something else. An auctioneer just doesn't open up a car. He took a bid from somewhere in the room, whether it was a person or a chandelier or the wall or whatever. This is the auction world. He opened up the.
Which should say is legal.
Which is legal because it's below the reserve.
Yeah.
He opened up the bidding, in my opinion, whether you can hear it or not, at $13 million.
What was the reserve set at?
17, wasn't it?
No, because he bid
We
it to
don't know.
17.5. So, look, here's my very simple view. The auctioneer said 13. People might have heard incorrectly. The poor girl or guy inputting the numbers obviously heard it incorrectly and put 30 in, and wasn't even. It sort of doesn't matter. That's what she did. He got the bids going.
Wasn't he looking at the screen though? Couldn't he see?
No, the screen's behind him. The screen's behind him.
So for people listening who maybe don't know, that this was the point: is the auctioneer did nothing wrong, but whoever was plugging in the numbers on the massive TV screens that the
which is
whole
behind him.
audience
Yeah.
is looking at, and everyone online watching live YouTube footage.
We're talking about a typo.
Yeah, no, yeah,
It's a typo between 13 or $30
Yeah.
million dollars. And so as far as the audience were concerned, bear in mind the auctioneer is, he's not English, he speaks fluent, brilliant English, but there's still a bit of an accent, chuck in a bit of fluffy distortion, whatever, from a microphone and a PA
and he's
system.
going quickly as well. It's not, this wasn't, he wasn't stalling the bidding. It was.
Now, you love conspiracy theories. Was anyone actually bidding on this car, Edward?
I believe there was not one real bid in the room. People could disagree with me, but we know the market well enough. There's no one to pay $30 million for that car. And the bids just won't go up that quickly on a car like that. So I don't believe there was a bidder, and I believe the only person that was wrong on the whole thing was the owner of the car who wanted too much money for it. Because if it was being sold at no reserve, it would have very quickly been corrected, because someone would have stood up in the room and said, no, I said $1 million, not $30 million.
Yeah.
And we would have found out what the car's worth. But the car's been for sale for a long time. Anyone who's suitable for that type of car has been offered it.
Yeah.
It's not worth.
I think it's a real shame. There have been some pretty sensationalist stories since, and a lot of hype, and it just doesn't justify the situation. It's really simple.
Yeah.
Some administrative, somebody with fat thumbs plumbed in the wrong number, and
they
the
did,
auctioneer carried on regardless.
But one other thing, and I will say this, and some people may dislike me for saying this, RM Auction had 3 days of auctions over that weekend, a week and a half ago. And the market is tough. And for an auctioneer to have to stand up there hour on end looking out at the audience with not that many hands being put up with, and they would have been telling the owner of that car for the weeks leading up to the auction that we haven't got much interest, we think you need to reduce your reserve, and to be told no, to get onto the final day of that car, I think they just would have rattled through it. If he's not going to, we know the market better than anyone, is what they would be thinking. We're just going to rattle through this. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, not sold, thank you, bye. And I think that's how it would have got. He would have been tired up there, and then they don't want to play the games of these owners that want too much money for their cars.
No.
Anyway.
Well, I've got to be careful because I like RM and they give me cars to drive. It's a very good non-commercial relationship because people say, do you get paid for those films? I don't at all. I can't. I work for the BBC. But I pride myself on separating the interest in the machinery from the commercial reality of what it's worth. I don't care what it's worth, really. It doesn't interest me at all. As a historical object, it's fascinating. I mean, I've sat and driven a car that I can be pretty sure Hitler sat in. Now that's nothing. I'm not proud of that. It doesn't give me any sort of great satisfaction, but it is something that I probably never thought I'd do in my life. And I love the fact that it's the genesis of what became the car company that interests me the most, which is Porsche. And I love the fact that you can see that sort of the genesis of that. You can see the beginning of the DNA of that company in that product. The way that the headlights sit in that front wing, you go... I showed my 8-year-old a picture of it. I said, what's that? He went, it's a Porsche.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely fascinating. And the more I thought about that, I thought, what value do you place on that? So if I had a net worth of $5 billion, what would I pay for that car? Quite a lot of money is the answer. But clearly none of those individuals with those resources are that interested in it. And I'm sad that the auction went that way, because in some respects it probably does harm the long-term prospects for that car.
Yeah, well, look, the car is worth what someone's willing to pay for it, and they didn't even stand a chance of finding out what someone's willing to pay for it on the night.
I'd have thought there'll be some very clever sort of blue chip collector out there who's
waiting,
maybe sort of rubbing his hands with glee and letting the dust settle.
There are so many conspiracy theories about the car, though. There is one that Porsche tried to buy it, couldn't buy it. The guy wanted too much money. I don't know what it was, and that Porsche then, having not been able to buy it, started a low-level PR campaign to question the provenance of the vehicle. I mean, again, I hasten to add the word alleged. I've heard all sorts of rumours about it. I suppose if all publicity is good publicity, a lot more people, as you say, now know the car exists than ever did 6 months ago. RM have done a superb job of making it famous. I mean, the thing made it onto Bloomberg. It's not often a car makes it onto front page news internationally, is it?
Yeah.
So they did a good job of that. What else came out of that auction that you found interesting? I spoke to you afterwards on the blower, and you Edward, you said there was some stuff. You were just interested that the no reserve cars, there were some real bargains being had.
There were, unfortunately for us British car dealers going over there with pounds in our back pocket, it didn't buy us many dollars. So there weren't so many opportunities for us to pick up some good deals. But there's a few things from my mind came out of it. There were several cars put into the auction that have been quietly for sale for some time. I think none of them sold, which shows the owners want too much money for them. And this is not a market where you can dictate what you want for something. In most cases, it's a buyer's market. I think the auction houses in general did a very good job. There were a huge amount of cars offered over the weekend at no reserve. So there were some very cheap cars and there were some surprises. I think the best result for a single car was the little 1967 911S with a rally pack, estimated at $250,000. It made $950,000 or $930,000. That was a very cool car. First paint, 8,000 miles. Lovely thing.
Cool.
What do you think, Sam?
No,
I'm sure you weren't there, but you watched from afar.
Well,
I'm sure.
The fact that I wasn't there sort of says a little something about my personal experience of where the market's at as well, because I don't get heavily involved in the classic road car sector in the way that you do. It's what you've been doing all day, every day, forever. I'm very much more immersed in the historic racing world, and it all starts with the driver coaching that I do, because you build a relationship with an owner who's racing his cars, and over time they start to ask, what do you think I should buy next? Or you have a conversation where you say, look, you're really getting on top of this car, you could handle something a lot more powerful, or maybe it's the other way around sometimes. And you end up sourcing or helping sell or brokering, whatever. And I've been packed off to Pebble Week for the last 4 or 5 years on behalf of various clients to go and see or buy or sell or do something. And this was the first time that hasn't happened, actually.
That's very telling, isn't it?
I mean, just in my microcosm of that world, I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, the car market I find both fascinating and exasperating and tedious at the same time at the moment. Last week there was a picture of top 555, I think, on an Instagram screen grab someone sent me, of a 720S they have for sale for 160 grand with a list of 280 under 2,000 miles. I mean, the arse has fallen out of some certain parts of the market, and quite rightly so. What's
interesting is, though, that the race car sector seems to be more resilient. I'm not saying it hasn't taken a hit.
But that makes total sense, because there are fewer of them, because they're being used, and most importantly, they're being bought for the right reasons by the right people with the right money.
I mean, take this place today. I mean, I've been here, it feels like, pretty much every day for the last week or so, as everyone's getting testing and ready for the revival. It's absolutely packed, and we've already chatted with various racer friends in the paddock who are here with newly acquired cars, and I was here yesterday and eavesdropping over lunch, and another driver saying, I bought this, and I bought that, and that, and that, and that, and it's like, wow, there's a lot of transactions happening. I'm not saying that they're happening at the peak prices of, say, 2014, but because these things are eligible for so many events, there's so much you can do with a historic race car, that it seems to be a bit more resilient than a road car sector.
I also think a lot of the people that spend the money have earned the money and therefore are very clever. They didn't become very wealthy without being sharp. And if you take a 10-year view on a very expensive motor car now, I think you'd have to want it to be competition eligible. Because this is where you'll be using it in 10 years' time. It's conceivable that you won't be allowed to drive a 250 short wheelbase anywhere near any town in 10 years' time. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but the rate of change and also the rate of social non-acceptance of polluting vehicles means that might be the case. But you'd have thought that Goodwood could probably ring fence that.
Yep.
So if you were going to have the money in a car and you can't compete with it, I mean, I've got some old snotters, and I have to say, I'm thinking, what am I going to do with them? They're going to become useless. And there's a lurking subprime there. An example I give you is a Ferrari F40.
Is Eulers moving out to Somerset soon? I thought the sort of North Circular.
Yeah.
So the low emissions zone in London.
Oh, is it? Oh,
is moving out to Somerset. He's going to have to pay a lot of tax.
I ask, dearie me, Edward. I asked this. I use this as an example, right? So Ferrari F40, which is my poster car from when I was a kid.
Yeah, me too.
I love driving them.
Yeah.
I'd love to own one. What they now? A good one's over £1 million. A bad one's £1 million. Is that about right?
Yeah.
Okay. Which to me seems an awful lot of money for a car which, and this is a stat that the great Andrew Frankel always cite. There are more F40s built than 993 RSs.
Wow, you're kidding.
Yeah, there are. They built a lot of F40s.
Wow.
And so there's a few about. And I suspect everyone that got burnt or crashed has reappeared. I don't think many are lost titles, as they say.
Yeah.
So what's one of those worth in 10 years' time? If you can't drive it everywhere you want to on the road, you can't race it because it's not a racing car. What's it worth? Does it have value as an object, as a piece of art? Does it become installation art?
Yeah.
Is it a Banksy? Is it is it something like that? That you've moved on a generation, so it probably isn't as significant as it once was because people like you and I that saw it.
Poor Sam won't fit in one.
No, I do.
You do.
I've driven the same car that you made famous. You've done more for the values of those NF50s than anyone on the planet. I think with
Jamie's
your
car.
incredible video.
Jamie's car.
Oh, man.
So that was an interesting conversation. Now we'll talk about that in a minute. We ought to get him on this. He's an interesting guy, Jamie, isn't he? But what's that car worth? Is it worth £1 million? I'm not sure it is. Because I'm not sure it's as part of the vernacular as it once was.
Yeah.
Because it's not as relevant to the people that will then be rich enough to buy it. You can't use it the way it was intended. So I'm not trying to dampen the value of F40s. Yeah. God, I'd love one. Yeah. I'd love to be able to afford one.
No, I'm not sure. The F40 is an interesting car because it's a poster car for a generation, but it's actually not a single generation. It's you think about the people that like an F40. They're everyone from sort of late teens to 70 years old.
Dude, my 14-year-old doesn't give a monkey to an F40. Nor do any of his friends.
But a lot of people I've sold F40s to, and the thing I love about an F40 is it's never really about investment. That's the one that they can afford it now. That's the one I want.
That's a good point. So the people are buying them for the right reasons.
Correct.
Okay.
So is there a case to be made that there are halo cars that are somewhat impervious to these?
Yes, there are cars that are ring fenced.
Yeah.
Short wheelbase we just walked past. We've just walked past a silver short wheelbase. And Edward and my face is just melted because for me it is the car, more so than a GTO. I think an alley-bodied short wheelbase is the thing that I'd sell my children for.
But that's from a previous generation. That's not the generation that you grew up with.
But I'm a car geek, so obviously my interest probably expands further into other generations than is normal. So, but I do think there are vehicles that are ring fenced. I think that I think of GTO. I think so all the special Ferraris, all the special Italian tackle is ring fenced. Mm-hmm. Quite a bit of the German stuff probably as well. Some of the British stuff, but we're talking about the absolute apex material. I think C-type, D-type, they're great, but what about a semi-lightweight E? I suppose that's a competition car, isn't it? I'm talking about stuff you can't compete in.
Yep.
Stuff that's stuck between the rock and the hard place.
Yeah.
If you can't use it as intended, if you can't race it and yet you can't Sunday it, what role does it have then?
So the question is, so hopefully we're all going to be around for quite a few decades to come, and as long as that's the case, the people of our generation, I hope, would remain interested in owning something like an F40, and I can't imagine a world where you're not allowed to use it. It just might be, quite expensive to use it or not the done thing.
The place I'm slightly getting to is I think there are many parallels with the wine market. Now, I don't buy much wine. What I do, I drink. But those people that get involved in, these wine indexes and trade wine, the amazing thing is, of course, the one thing that never happens, it never gets drunk.
Yeah.
So this is a product that's been commoditized and is traded as a very valuable object, but its intended purpose is never reached. You don't drink it, but it retains that value. So if you can trade wine and never drink it, why can't you trade cars and never drive them? Is that possible?
I mean, Edward, you'd be better to answer that than me, but just...
I'm not interested in that, but...
The thing is, cars need to be driven. That's the first thing. The second thing is they're big physical objects that need to be stored and transported. They're not as versatile as wine, or even better, classic watches. I mean, the ultimate sort of flexible asset class to invest in or collect, because they're just so manageable. If you're storing and keeping and trading a lot of them, a car is much more difficult in that sense. So there must be a limitation.
It's a very interesting.
Look, I'm not one to talk about investment because I don't invest in cars. It's I buy and sell what I like.
Yeah, which is key.
And if someone says, "Is that going to double in price?" Well, I don't know. Ask someone else. But I think an F40 will always be a highly desirable car, whatever price level that is. I don't know, but it will be a desirable car.
I'm sad to hear that your 14-year-old isn't interested in it.
Not interested, and I'm sure he's seen that. Well, he might not have seen that film, and it's a difficult example to choose because it's understandable my offspring might have a complicated relationship with cars. Yep. It's robbed them a lot of time with their father, I would have thought. but their generation generally has far less interest in motor vehicles than any of us understand. Yep. They're into gaming. They're into a virtual world. Yep. When you see Montoya and Barrichello joining this e-racing community, you can completely see why.
Totally,
it's massive. It's going to be massive. I do believe that the generational nature of these interests is really important. We ignore that at our peril. It's what my garage of cars is ramshackle and ridiculous. But if you go and look at a copy of Performance Car from 1989 or Car Magazine, you'll totally understand why I have them. They are the cars that I wanted when I was at that impressionable age. The age at which you were talking about having limitless possibilities. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to own those cars. But no one... But I fear the next generation won't do that. I mean, it's conceivable that our children won't even drive.
Yeah, but it's conceivable that it might be really antisocial to own a car.
I know.
And let alone to drive in anything that emits anything.
And that's why it's really apt that we're sitting here at Goodwood, because we've all got a few friends who are sceptical of what we do, who view us as being slightly noisy, polluting, selfish bastards, right? In our coming here to this slightly swanky event. It's a closed door, it's an old boys club, and you think you're all better than the rest of us. There's nothing better to disavow them of that opinion than bring them to the revival, is there? I've done it a couple of times, brought people along that were sniffy and just said this is ridiculous. And within 10 minutes, they stood at Mandrake watching you sliding round as the sun fades in the Kinrara on the bank, and they go, this is just magnificent.
It's magic.
And it just changes their opinions completely. You need to bring them all here.
Which is why we're all, so grateful. Speaking personally, I think that Goodwood was the catalyst. It's been the fuel that has allowed the historic racing fraternity and event calendar to just explode over the last sort of 15 or so years. And I think it all got kick-started here. It existed before. It was, historic club racing was a thing, but it was a niche group of enthusiasts on a far smaller scale than that which we've become accustomed to. And the great thing about Goodwood is it's not just for the blokes in the paddock, it's for all the families in the stands and on the grass banks as well. And that will keep these cars alive, and the passion and enthusiasm for it, I hope, for decades to come.
So I think you're in the right place. I think competition cars, bang on.
Yeah.
In fact, what I would like to do is sell some of my older, less valuable rubbish and see if I could cobble some money together and own a GT Junior or something.
We'll get you in a Formula Ford or something like that,
I don't
Chris.
want to bloody hurt myself. So now we're sitting at Goodwood. Here's an interesting one for you. Now, I'm a little bit salty and sore about a particular video that always gets shown on the What Not to Do When You Drive at Goodwood driver's briefing, where they show me braking in a bloody straight line and a GTO firing off. It's my podcast, so I can say what I want. It's my bloody opinion. I did nothing wrong. I've got my on board. My steering wheel is straight. The circuit moves there. It wasn't me. Yeah. And they show it as an example of what not to do in a braking zone. And every time, 50 people around me laugh, and all my mates go, Harris, you knob. Now, so joking aside, has this place become too competitive at the top end, or is that just a natural corollary of competitive people with money and cars?
Well, the first thing is, just on that video, and for listeners who don't know, this is a massive driver's briefing with the Duke of Richmond and all of his stewards and there's probably 300 people in the room or something, and
they
show these videos as part of a way to disincentivize you from taking it too seriously. It's a sort of public naming and shaming of previous misdemeanors. But I've never thought the clip that they show repeatedly of you is about you.
It is. It's about the first year they said, don't outbrake yourself, so it looked like it was him. And the second year they said, don't move in the braking zone if there's a faster car behind you. And I was at the back just going, what the...
I never knew that. I always thought from the first time I ever saw footage of that.
The cheering that goes on. I mean, it is highly amusing for all my friends, but... Well,
I kind of feel for everyone involved in that little incident, because it's so easy for that to happen. But, it is a part of the road that jinks left and then jinks right, but you take a straight line through it. What that means for the guy behind is you see a gap, and that gap closes very, very quickly.
We all know it well enough to know that you have to be very, very certain if you're going to stuff it up the inside there.
Yeah, particularly in historic cars, because they don't brake all that well and they waft across the road. It's not like you pick your lane and you stay in it. As soon as you try and turn and brake at the same time, you're into the lane to the left of you and then the one after that.
And also that you marry the circular friction available with an old tyre with the way the brakes work on an old car. What people don't realise that haven't driven one of these things is you tend to get into a very steady state braking.
Yeah.
You find where the maximum retardation is that isn't wearing your brakes out but isn't going too slow, and you stick with it.
Yep.
And if you ask any more of the car at that point, you get an immediate lockup, don't you? You're done. It just leaves you straight away.
Very much so.
And with that, you also lose the ability to change the direction of the car.
Yep.
So once you're committed into a braking zone in an old car, it's not like being in a modern GT3 car. You don't have any options. You're there.
Exactly. And you don't have much space to gather it all up. I had this yesterday. Don't tell Gregor Fiskin. I was doing a couple of laps in his Cobra that he's racing in the TT in a couple of weeks. And I must have braked down at Woodcote. I mean, you can't count 5 meters, but it felt pretty much the same as the previous lap. And I suddenly locked up the inside front, and for reasons that still I don't quite understand, next thing I know, the rear snapped sideways. And for what felt like 5 seconds was probably, a gnat's whisker of a second, I was sort of, I think all 4 wheels locked up sideways on the way into Goodwood.
I'm going to be in the papers.
And then but it comes back, and you kind of get used to it. But and all was well, but it's such a fine line in a historic car between, as you say, you're driving within and up to the limits of the car, and suddenly that line that is the limit, it's not a window, it's a line, and you step over it in an instant.
It's particularly for me under brakes. The cars under brakes are largely inert.
Yeah.
They don't give you many options, which is a complete total difference to the way they feel under power. Under power, they feel limitless possibilities. You've got slip angles to play with. You can really position them where you want to.
That's a very wide window in the corner on power.
And
you're
you
right.
can do what you want. You feel that there's a very broad canvas to play with. But under brakes, you're limited.
Yeah.
Okay, so we digress massively there. So I've had my whinge. It's a really interesting place to race here, because the difference between the very pointy end, where there's a lot of prep being done on the cars and some very, let's say, competitive driving going on, and the back where some blokes just paid 5 million quid for a very eligible car and it's been invited to Goodwood, is so enormous that at times it worries me.
Yeah, but we didn't quite answer your question. Is it getting too competitive here at Goodwood? I think no, it's absolutely not. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and I love that in historic racing with really important priceless cars, we're racing them at the sharp end of the revival grids with the same level of intensity that they would have been raced back in the day. So I feel like we're doing it justice. Where the line does get crossed is maybe the pressure on preparers. And don't just blame preparers for this. Blame also owners who pay the bills and put pressure on preparers to cheat. And there is only so much that scrutineers can keep on top of. And it is possible to do things under the skin that it would take a hell of an investigation, a time-consuming investigation to really figure out what they're up to. And that's where I start to think, look, I love a clever interpretation of the rules, and there's things that we all do, but you still got to be legal. If adjustable dampers are, adjustable ride height dampers are not allowed, then don't come with adjustable ride height dampers. But if you want to go testing with adjustable ride height dampers and figure out the optimum ride height for your car, and then have a set made to match that are non-adjustable, what's wrong with that? I actually kind of applaud that. I think that's clever. That's what this is competition. Yeah. That's what racing's all about. And some of the drivers here at the sharp end that are really quick and pushing the boundaries and are the ones that maybe come under questioning of, is that too intense? Is that pace too quick? We don't want to see lap times below X. I think, hang on, that was some of the best motor racing I've ever seen ever, including countless Grand Prix on TV and what,
No,
that was amazing.
I totally
racing.
agree with you. There's a couple of points there. One, it was telling, wasn't it, before the members' meeting that as drivers we received the name and shame email, which we'd never had before. So we were all sent an email, weren't we, which listed every individuals that were not welcome back or on final warnings. It was basically like, it read like my school report.
I got a doctored one that put me on the list.
Did you?
From Ludovic Lindsay, and I absolutely shat myself because I don't know how I've got away. I've been racing here for 15 years, and I've got to touch wood. I've got a clean sheet.
Oh, commentators bloody curse.
But, I know, Christ. Okay,
Mate,
I should have done that, sorry.
yeah.
Really stitched myself
and I
up.
think the other thing, and I love Goodwood, I'm a massive fan of Goodwood, and I'll do whatever I can to promote their events, because I really believe this is the best motorsport event of any type in the world.
I agree.
They are very keen to stop drivers driving in a certain way, and yet when there's a shunt, their social media is all over it and putting the images out there. So I think they're slightly morally compromised there. They need to decide what their position is.
I've often thought that's a bit uncomfortable. Yeah.
You
you and I sit in a driver's briefing, or occasionally we get hauled up to the steward after a race for an absolute rollicking, and then that same incident is replayed countless times on Goodwood's own social media. It's like, really?
What? This was a great shunt.
Yeah.
But it's all the fun of the fair, and there's always this lurking suspicion that something bad could happen here. But you know what? It's a fast racing circuit. Everyone that comes here knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And you come here at your own risk. And frankly, for me, the fun that you have here far outweighs the danger.
Yeah. But the line is, at what point do you risk the car? The preservation of the car has to be your ultimate goal, and that's what I try to keep in the front of my mind. And look, sometimes in racing things go wrong, but fundamentally, if you put the car's victory or the car's success, as it were, coming home in one piece, having done it justice, having hopefully extracted most of its potential, you keep that as your priority rather than the finishing position, then hopefully you're going about it in the right way.
Yeah, I think so. That's always been my aim. I think you're normally here either with the owner of the car.
Yeah.
The first thing is that they have a fun weekend. That's it.
Yeah.
The second thing is that you bring the car home. I mean, that's I as long as they're having fun and smiling, I don't really mind. We've both been in more competitive situations where more's required of you, and you might get the just win conversation, which is actually a lovely conversation to have.
Well, I get that, except it's a longer sentence. It's make sure you win, but don't you dare damage my car.
That doesn't work.
Yeah.
So they don't quite link together.
Normally you're in the assembly area and you're about to be waved out onto the grid when you have that conversation. It's like,
Richard, if you're listening to this, Richard Frankel he'd do that to me. He's before he'd go, right, just go and win. Yeah. And then just before I'd left, he'd go, don't bend it. And you go, thank you, Richard. Yeah. Right, that's a convenient place to have a little stop. So go and have a comfort break, and also, as I did yesterday, go and find an undiscovered packet of Jaffa cakes and devour them, because the Jaffa cake is an underrated piece of confection. And we'll be back after
Is it a
the
cake
break.
or a biscuit?
It's technically a cake. Did you know that?
I
got brought up on that because I said it was in my biscuit tin.
Well, I saw
and I had a load of smug people saying, well, why would you put cake in a biscuit tin? I digress. Go and have a wee. See you soon. Collecting Cars, the safe, smart and simple way to buy and sell collectible cars. An online auction platform for the UK and Europe. Follow us on Instagram at Collecting Cars and also collectingcars.com.
CollectingCars.com podcast with Chris Harris and Edward Lovett.
Welcome back to this Collecting Cars podcast, where Goodwood is strangely quiet, but I'm sure we'll have some GT40s and E-Types come herring past in a minute and make some more noise. Here with Edward Lovett, that's at Edward Lovett, and Sam Hancock at, so you're Hancock _ Sam.
Correct.
Right, okay, I got it.
Well remembered, yeah. At Hancock _ Sam, yeah.
Here's a tricky subject. Cheating in motorsport, because we've touched on the legalities of some of the cars that turn up to Goodwood. What is the best motorsport cheat that you've ever heard? The one that makes you smile at the effrontery of it and the cleverness of it?
Such a good question. So I had the incredible opportunity to work with Steve Nichols, who was technical director at McLaren during the Senna Prost era, and then went on to be technical director at Ferrari and then Jaguar and he is, to me, he's like an Adrian Newey of that era. He is just an engineering, motor racing, Formula One god.
A walking forehead.
Yeah, he's just fantastic, and he's so chill. He's a lovely guy, and he's become a really good family friend. And I was doing a bit of historic F1 racing a few years ago, and he very kindly engineered the car, and the stories that he tells about his time, particularly at McLaren, are just fascinating. And I remember we were having trouble getting the right balance on this historic F1, which was a Fittipaldi from 1977. It was slagged off at the time for being one of the crappiest cars ever built, and it wasn't that bad, but Steve was brilliant at helping us getting it right. And he said, well, back in it's my terrible sort of Canadian. Is he Canadian? No, where's he from? Don't know. My terrible impression. Back in the day, we had similar issue on McLaren, whatever. And I said to Alain, maybe if we do this thing with the spring, and they basically created a very clever spring that under load got progressively stiffer, but so that when the aerodynamic load reduced and it came back in for its ride height check, the car would sit back up tall and fulfill all the minimum ride height regulations. But under aero load in the corner, it was absolutely pinned to the floor. I just love stuff like that. It's fantastic. But he said they had to get the construction of the spring just right so that it would expand back up to its normal height, legal height, in time for the ride height check when the car peeled into the pit lane and had to go onto the flat patch.
I just love stuff.
That's cool,
like that.
Isn't it?
I suppose cheat's the wrong word. Interpretation of the rules.
Yeah.
Is because that is what motorsport's about.
My dad was pretty good at it when I was in karting. My first year, 9 years old in cadet karting. I'm 6'2" now. I was always tall, and I love a bacon roll at the karting burger van, so I was always a bit fat as well and needed to be lighter. And I went racing with a cadet car that had a secretly hollow, made of aluminium rear axle when it should be solid steel, and all of the nudge bars, which are on karts, they're all chromed steel. They were all aluminium, and I constantly had, was it Brasso or Autosol or whatever it was, and a rag constantly buffing them up to make them look like proper steel chrome. I mean, had a little bicycle drinks bottle for our fuel tank instead of a full normal plastic thing, and all of that.
You recently drove on Top Gear in the Williams car, didn't you, with the...
the Lotus 79.
Sorry, the Lotus 79.
The 79, that story is mega, and that made me realise that that's something I want to do. Is I want to go and make some more of those films. The fact that that one went down very well.
Yeah, that was brilliant.
We get quite good, accurate data back of what people like and what they don't like, and that went down well. So I've been given the green light to do some others.
Fantastic.
Coming up, and I won't say what they are, but I'm really looking forward to it. In fact, that's what I'd like to go and do. I'd like to go and do some 45 minutes and do 4 or 5. Why can't you go and tell some stories?
6-wheel Tyrrell.
Oh yeah, the racing stories and road car stories. I hear anecdotes. One of the great privileges of doing the job I've done for the last 20 odd years, is you get to meet people who just impartially will drop lovely anecdotes, and one of the mistakes I've made is I've not written them all down because I like to go and investigate something. What can come out of a single statement. I thought of one the other day because I've got a 928 S4 that Richard Tuttle and I are still trying to make work properly. I think we've just about got there now. It's a car it's another one of those poster cars there's no logical reason to own the bloody thing because by modern standards it's rather cramped, inefficient and not very fast. But I just always wanted a 928 and I bought an S2 and it was a shambles, so I bought an S4 now, which is not the one I like the look of, but it's a Manuel and it's a great car. And I was talking to this bloke at the Paris Motor Show about 10 years ago who was part of the design team, and he said we were packed off to the wind tunnel in 76 with the car before it was going to be launched. And people forget that the 928 remains the only sports car that's ever won the car of the year. In 77 it was the car of the year. And we knew a bit about aerodynamics then. We were sticking things in wind tunnels. We understood it. And they said they were very happy with the results of the car, but they weren't spectacular. Then someone decided to reverse the car into the wind tunnel, and it performed exactly the same in reverse as it did going forwards.
I get it. Thinking about it now, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Look at it, it makes. But so I just love to take that single sentence and create a film around that statement. And then you start to understand more about the car and the people and the processes.
Did the same man design the Audi TT, the first Audi TT?
The TT, or the first Boxster. I still think the first Boxster's problem was the back didn't look like the front, didn't look enough like the back.
Yeah, exactly right, yeah.
So I think you hear some wonderful cheats. I forget what we've done on these podcasts. Have I ever mentioned that the one I heard or that I read somewhere about the Walkinshaw V12?
Was that the hidden fuel tanks?
That was the one where they had the bladder to inflate.
No,
so
we
they
haven't talked about
They
it.
had a bigger fuel tank in the car than was allowed.
Right.
And I'm sure I'm getting this right because it involves Wynne Percy, who's closely connected with this place. And I don't want to get this story wrong. So I have got it wrong. Please write in on Instagram or Twitter and correct me. So this thing had a 7-litre V12 in it or something.
Yeah.
And no one can understand how it was so economical.
Yeah.
Because it had, they had a standardised fuel tank size. But apparently it had a much bigger fuel tank than was allowed. And at the end of the race, it had an inflatable bladder in the tank. So what you'd do is you'd have to crank this tank, he'd have a hand pump to crank this bladder full.
Right.
That would reduce the volume. So they checked the size of the tank.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah.
But after, and Murray, I think Murray Walker was doing the commentary in those days.
Right.
And after the race, Wynne Percy would be absolutely knackered, sweating. And Murray would always say it was because of the physicality of this V12 animal. It wasn't. It's because he'd been furiously pumping under the seat to try and fill up this bladder. It's just a fun time. I hope it's true, and I hope I haven't misquoted it. I just love stuff like that.
It just occurred to me, like, how many people have we just thrown under the bus? How many world championship victories are going to be reviewed?
And I say allegedly. I might have got that story completely wrong.
Me too. It's all alleged.
But I think it's the great book that will never get written. It's such a shame because if you knew some of them that we never knew about, I mean, it's going on everywhere, isn't it? And it's fascinating because it's a moral conundrum that bending the rules is at the very heart of this sport, isn't it?
But it's taking the rules right to their limit. I went to listen to Gordon Murray speak the other day, and he was talking about the Brabham fan car, and and the rule was that you're not allowed moving parts that are, I think it was aerodynamic, but you are allowed it if it's in relation to the cooling of the car. And so I love the idea. He didn't think, right, does that work for us or not? He got on the phone to a lawyer and he said, what is your interpretation of this regulation? And the lawyer said, well, taking it word by word, it's got to be a certain percent. It's got to have like 51%, I think. The majority of its function has to be to cool the car. And that is the legal definition of that regulation. So long as the majority, 51% or whatever it is serving that purpose, then you can do what you want with the rest of it. And he said, yep, perfect, that works for us, done.
It's the lateral thinkers, isn't it?
So clever.
It's the people that see a regulation written down, and rather than go, okay, I'll build something to that spec, they think, what can I do? What does that actually mean? And where can I go with it? Yeah, I love that. Really cool.
We've had Dr. Ferdinand pass away this week as
so
well.
that's a very good one. So yeah, Piek, who is for me undoubtedly the great automotive engineer of my generation. If you look at what he did, Andrew Frankel wrote a lovely thing on their Drive Nation site on Instagram, which you should all hook up to, by the way. It's a really, really good Instagram account, Drive Nation, where he gave a very brief précis of some of Piek's career highlights, and one was that he was, as a young engineer working at Porsche, obviously he was part of the family. He was brought onto the 911 project early on, and the car had a wet sump design, and that wasn't suitable for motorsport. So the whole thing was redesigned at PX bidding to be dry sumped, and that was entirely because of him, and he wanted to go racing.
Wow!
And so all of the early 911s drove because of the way he wanted them to drive as an engineer. He was responsible for the 917. When they finished the 917 project, he'd had enough. There was no more racing, so he moved off to Audi, and then he fathered the Audi Quattro. That was entirely him, which redefined rallying and probably redefined road car dynamics and what was possible with axles that could vector effectively. And then he began empire building, didn't he? And I remember him standing up at the Geneva Motor Show in 99, 2000, and talking about the Seat Leon. He was the one that brought all those other brands in, and Volkswagen, which was, when he took over in 93, was literally weeks away from bankruptcy, and turned it into the biggest car company in the world, and subsequently he was responsible for the Veyron. I mean, the great thing is a load of completely unnecessary, financially ridiculous projects happened because of him, and I love that. You know, without the PX of this world, you wouldn't have a Veyron. It's not commercially viable. You don't make money out of a Veyron. You just lose money.
Yeah.
And it's really sad that the way the FT reported his demise in their kind of news stories / obituary, the FT said that, you know, they referred to the Veyron as a massive financial flop. That wasn't they've missed the point.
Yeah.
It was an engineering showcase. It was showing you what VW could do, and in that respect, it was a bit like the Porsche 959. It prefaced the technologies that were coming. This was a car that was heavily turbocharged and had a dual clutch gearbox. What do all cars now have? You know, it was an engineering showcase. So, and I think he was a famously difficult man. And I mentioned on Twitter, I only ever met him a couple of times to shake his hand, and he just, you know, then he walked off. But I once went to collect a press car. I was in Germany, and I needed a 997 GT2 RS to do a story. And they're very German over there, as you can imagine. It's very organised. You make your booking. They're very straightforward whether you can have the car or not. For the first time ever, I got there, and they gave me sorry, it's not here. And luckily, I was over there doing something else anyway. And I did say, come on, guys, this is a bit wrong. If I'd had 5 cars lined up to do this and I was budgeting for a film, this would be a problem. Yep. Is the car being crashed or something? And they went, no, and they were a bit quiet and cagey. Right. And then I had a mate who worked there, and we went for a cup of coffee. He says, a bit embarrassing, but basically Mr. Piek hadn't driven a GT2 RS and wanted to drive one, so they packed it off to him at the last minute. He wanted it the other day, and he said, can I have one? They went, yeah, you have one. I just love the fact that he had such clout there, and he was the godfather of the whole edifice, that frankly I can go get rid of him, get rid of the journalist, he can go and drive a Boxster for the day, and we'll send it to
the
Mr.
irony
PA.
is, if only they had just been honest and told you that was why your car wasn't there, you'd have probably been like, fair
that's
enough.
Cool.
That's cool.
if you're gonna be one upped by someone, let it be him. And I just some of the sort of stories and the urban myths that went around about him. For example, any VW product that was made after about 95, if you put your hand underneath the dashboard, there's no clutter. Yeah. There's always a smooth surface. There's no wires hanging down. There isn't a bonnet release there. There's no clutter. He hated that. He'd get into a car and just do that. He had his foibles. There were certain things about a motor vehicle that were non-negotiable for him. One was the sort of the cleanness under the steering column, which I love. Yeah. There's another story about and I don't know whether this is true or not, air conditioning in hotel rooms. He hated air conditioning, so he always carried with him the tools that could disconnect any air conditioning system in any hotel room. And there's screwdrivers and spanners and things, so he could turn the thing off.
Love it.
But went on to become a very, very rich man, and his last few years at VW were pretty fraught, I think, and what happened subsequently with Dieselgate was tricky as well. But I think there was a huge respect for his engineering abilities, and I would love to go make a film about him. In fact, my filmmaking friend from America wants to do it, and I think I might put some time and money into it, because what a story and what a legacy he left.
But the people that create those kind of legacies, those kind of products that will be cherished and will continue to have that wow factor for so much time to come. It's the Steve Jobs effect, isn't it? It just takes this one visionary guy to do all the extra things, the little things that, like sweeping his hand under the dash to check that there's no clutter, or making sure, it's that. Jobs would have said, this isn't just a computer. It doesn't just need to, do what a computer does. It needs to look and feel beautiful as well. And whilst we're at it, let's make the packaging beautiful, because all of the touch points are the things that our customers are experiencing. So let's take care of those details. And it's the same story. It's the same
Piek was effectively the person that launched Audi as a brand, because Audi was, late 70s, was nowhere, and even into the 80s. If you drove an Audi, what were you saying about yourself? You were saying, I don't really care about cars, and I'm not that interested. And the Quattro just exploded onto the scene, and was winning all the group tests in the magazines, and it was also cool. It immediately launched this brand. And then towards the late 80s, Audi emerged as a bit of a yuppie brand, but it still was very much second to third tier behind BMW and Mercedes. And it was the B I forget my Bs. Was it a B5 A4? The car from 94, 95 that changed everything with a brilliant advertising campaign that's so ironic now. I don't know if you remember the advert. It was a fantastic piece of television advertising where a complete yuppie wanker and he's in his lunch break. He's got a brick phone and he's just a bit of a knob. And he goes to test drive an A4 and he's just talking about himself. I haven't seen it for ages, but this is my recollection of the advert. He's talking about himself, and as you watch him, you just think hateful twat. You think you're the plutocratic thing that I hate about this world. Yeah. And he's in the money markets, and he's telling the sales assistant next to him how great he is. Yeah, I'm making a load of money. He's basically he's loads of money, isn't he? And he drives this A4 around. I remember this. He drives this A4 round, and he shuts the door at the end, and he goes, "Nah, it's not for me." And it was a clever association. So what Audi was saying was, we're not a BMW. We're not a yuppie wanker's car. And of course, in many respects, Audi's gone on to be the brand that's occupied that space. So it's, be careful how you write your own history and the statements you make in the past. Because right now, they're probably more that than BMW or Mercedes. But back then, as a piece of advertising, you watched it and went, that's so clever.
Yeah, but that's, I feel like times have changed, and socially it's probably a little bit more, or seem to be more acceptable, isn't it, to be that kind of loud, in your face. I mean, narcissism is everything in the modern world.
So do modern cars interest you at the moment? Modern supercars and all that sort of stuff?
They do, but I'm not sort of super geeky on it. I've always loved driving. That's always been my thing, and it's really interesting now that I'm doing a little bit more on the media side and writing a little bit for some of the magazines and doing some presenting for Petrolicious and things. That I need to learn a bit more about cars. So I've been actually watching a load of your stuff and reading your stuff, and Dickie and Andrew Frankel and all these guys, and it was fascinating listening to your past podcast where you're referencing old magazines, ones that you've still got in the bog, and you still read that article, because that was, I didn't really grow up reading the car magazines. Friends would hang on every word that Evo wrote or whatever, and I got it, but I loved driving and I loved racing. And
sorry about that. The door's open, by the way, but I'm not going to apologise for the wonderful engine sounds on the back. If you're going to have your podcast disturbed by noise, it might as well be a GT40 or whatever that was. That was something with 4 cylinders, wasn't it?
But no, so I still would say that I love driving / racing slightly more than I love cars, because to me that's what it's, in the end, that's what it's all about. It's that experience.
It's a very common thing among racing drivers. It's quite rare to find racing drivers that really like street cars, because they can't understand them. They just see them as being utterly flawed. If I had this idea when we had a website called Drivers Republic years ago, I wanted to have Phil Bennett. Do you know Phil?
Yeah, sure.
So PB he's a racing driver from 15, 20 years ago. He's a great guy, very, very funny individual. I mean, hugely amusing. But he would just get in any road car and just go, and I will affect my Birmingham accent, and go, just understeers, monkey. Because basically every road car does understeer. They're designed that way. And I wanted to have this regular piece where Phil Bennett would go on a launch and just come back with the same conclusion about every car. So he'd go and drive the Veyron. Phil, what do you think of the Veyron? It understeers. And we'd call it the understeer files or something. And he would just come back with the same response. Because that is the racing driver approach. You get into, how often do you see, and it's not so bad these days, but quite often a manufacturer would take one of their factory racing drivers and make them drive the street car they sold. They drive punts around a racetrack, and it's it used to be a really messy thing to watch. Because they couldn't drive it. Because it was just crap. They couldn't adapt to how crap the road car was, basically.
Is he still racing, Phil Bennett?
No. He trains people in gyrocopters. In fact, Tuthill and him fly gyrocopters together, which for me is the ultimate cluster bomb of danger.
I remember right, when you and I did the 3-hour race at Spa in the Norma. He was racing that weekend in an Audi saloon?
Something like that. No, he was in one of those silhouette Formula... German, called an All-Star, wasn't it?
It
was a Vauxhall Omega.
And it was at the front.
He always would be. He's a great driver.
He did touring cars for a while, didn't he?
He bought the Egg sponsorship.
That's right.
To touring cars.
Yeah, and he was brilliant because he was really mouthy and he always got in trouble for what he was saying.
He just didn't give a monkey's.
I think we used to instruct together up at Palmer Sport or something back in the day.
There's an entire podcast of Phil Bennett's stories. He will never listen to this, but he knows full well that I've got stories about him that would leave us both incarcerated. But he was magnificent. But
But no, back to your point. So I do like modern cars. I love this mental hypercar movement that we've been experiencing for the last 10, 12 years. And there's something really special about that. I'm just sad that until now, ironically, it hasn't been incorporated into the top flight categories of motor racing, particularly at Le Mans, because you've got these crazy looking creations, the entire look of which is derived from racetrack functionality. So why wouldn't you have a category that accommodates all these manufacturers that actually have a crazy hypercar road car product to sell? So I'm kind of pleased it's moving in that direction now with Le Mans and so on.
I mean, you've raced prototypes extensively, therefore you'll have a different emotional response to the way they look, because you view it as, when you walk up to it, I'm sure you think, oh, there's a proper car. Yeah, it's got downforce. Yeah, that works. I think they've been a part of the problem of endurance racing for a long time, because they don't look like cars. They don't look recognisable, and they do to you. You spot the difference between a Ligier and a what have you, whereas the rest of us, it's just an amorphous blob. And I think for me, that I love seeing cars that look like cars. I want to see. The GT1 was great for me, and when you had a thing that looked a bit like a 911 racing a McLaren, racing an F40, racing a Bugatti, or with that. And I hope we get back there. I really do, because I think.
Well, it seems the movement's going that way.
It's going to, and car makers are not going to carry on spending money on stuff that doesn't look like what they sell. I mean, we talk about Audi. I mentioned Audi there with the Quattro. I still think for many people, what Audi achieved in 3-4 years on the world rally scene in the early 80s was more powerful for the brand of Audi than anything they did at Le Mans. Because because none of those cars look like Audis.
They sold them road cars,
See, I have a slightly different view, which is that if you show any 5-year-old kid that's been exposed or is into racing or not, an Audi, whatever, R18 from 2012 or whatever it was, how can you not be wowed by this sort of spacecraft-like machine? You know, the lovely thing about these closed-roof prototypes of the last 8 or so years is that they look like Batmobiles.
They do.
That is so important. Yeah. And that whole open-roof Spider period that we went through, you know, in the noughties and obviously several decades before that, it's okay. But when I was racing through that period, I craved a closed-roof prototype. And eventually I got into one. I got into the one that I thought was the best looking one, which was the Golf liveried Aston Martin OP1 car, the coupe, and to me that was it. You know, I still can't believe I drove that car. The first day I tested that, I just, it was absurd to me that I was about to drive.
Well, you were finally in the Group C car, weren't you? Basically, because I think all of us, of us thought of 962s as being, that was a sports car, wasn't it? Yeah,
exactly. You grow up, you know, maybe of our generation. I grew up drawing pictures of, you know, Rothmans liveried Porsche 962s and that to me, you know, Sauber, Mercedes, C9s, C11s, that to me was a real racing car. And if it wasn't Formula One, which I was obsessed with, then that was the only other thing that interested me, was those prototypes. And you mentioned earlier that there was this period, wasn't there, where GT cars were a bit sort of, they're sort of the sort of sore loser. And certainly when I started racing and transitioning from single seaters into sports cars, I'm ashamed to say now that is slightly how I thought about it. And the first time I ever drove a GT car, I think I mentioned earlier, it was on a blag, and I was at Road Atlanta at Petit Le Mans, desperately pounding the paddock trying to get a drive, and I didn't have one. Qualifying started. This is, you know, quite a big race at the time. I didn't have a seat by the time of qualifying. Then it was into the warm-up, and at the last minute, an hour before race day warm-up, the wife of one of the team owners, who I'd made a point of just being nice to for the whole weekend, said, "Look, I think you should just put Sam in the car." And there was this brilliant wife-husband conversation. You know, trying to work out the power dynamic and who actually is making decisions.
I think we all know where the power lies.
And I literally got told to get in the car, get your gear on, go out in the warm-up. And I had to say, you know, "Sam, have you ever raced at Road Atlanta before?" "Oh, yeah, I know it like the back of my hand. Did loads of winter testing here in Barber Dodge back at the day. Never seen it in my life." "Sam, have you ever raced a GT car, or particularly a Porsche GT3 car like this?" "Yeah, I have actually done a lot back in the UK. You know, spent quite a lot of time at the wheel. Never set a foot in anything other than a prototype or a single seater." And I went out on my outlap. It was pouring with rain, by the way. Can you imagine the luck? You know, been
great circuit though. Great circuit,
but didn't know it. Came out of that chicane, the penultimate corner. You're going up that steep hill, blind crest. which I assumed just went straight up the hill and then
bloody
straight
right-hander
down
at the end of it.
It's a significant right-hand kink as you appear over that crest, and I was fully lit in the wet in this thing which to me felt like a boat because I'd had no experience of GT cars, and I to this day have no idea how I got around that corner, but I did, and I went on to race, and somebody else crashed, and that was us done. But it was at the time like, oh, get me back in a single seater or a prototype, please. This is horrible.
Must have felt pretty lazy after that stuff.
Yeah, but these days GT cars don't feel like that, do they? You'll know better than me now. What's a modern GT car?
They're pretty amazing things.
Yeah,
they're
incredible.
They're aerodynamically sensitive. They're proper racing cars.
Prototype levels of performance in some ways. You've got more weight, but the
aero's very well balanced. They've got they develop proper downforce. They're probably like a GT1 car was 5-6 years ago, or longer. Whenever they were racing them, it's not far off.
GT, they are a bit. So funny enough, one of the cars I never got to race, but so wanted to, was an Aston Martin DBR9 GT1 car.
That's the one.
That is the one, and that along with the Ferrari 550 Maranello, those two for me.
Well, hold on, hasn't Max
He's
still
got one? Yeah.
Max is under a lot of pressure from me to.
Yeah, he needs to give you a go on that. Right. So just before we wrap up here, I want to ask you one thing. So you've got not a massive budget, Sam, but you've got a reasonable budget, and you've got to buy one car for yourself to go and compete in. It's a historic racing car, and it's got to be eligible, but you can't have a short wheelbase. Okay, what car would you have? What would be the one that you'd like to have that's usable?
Can I get a bit of clarity on the question, because it's a brilliant question? But is it for me or is it for a gen driver?
No, it's for you personally. It's for you personally. Not
what sort of budget?
Let's say you've got £250,000. Which obviously sounds awful to our listeners. In this world, is catering budget.
It's embarrassing to say, but that's hardly even entry level.
I know.
Well, if you need to use it as a deposit, we can finance the rest over 5 years.
I might take you up on that.
You love it as well. But you can buy something for $250 to go. And I know what I would probably aim for. But you tell me what you'd aim for at that budget.
Good question. See, I would always gravitate back towards the fastest, purest car I can think of, single seater. And if we were having this conversation 3 years ago, I'd have said, get me, I don't care, any dog of a historic Formula One car that's eligible.
Thought you might say
At the
that.
time, it would have been something like a Fittipaldi or whatever.
What about an
with a
Ensign? Can you still
DFV.
get an Ensign now for $250?
You know what, you might be able to actually. Yeah, with a DFV, eligible for the Masters FIA Historic Formula One, eligible for Monaco Historic, which to this day, despite all the modern Le Mans type stuff I've been lucky enough to race, racing a Formula One car at Monaco in the historic is hands down the best racing or driving experience I've had ever, and I'll probably never beat it. I would spend every penny of that and come to you, Ed, for some financing to buy whatever it was I could buy to get on the grid.
As long as it's got a DFV in it, you're happy.
Give me a DFV and single seater, and I'm happy forever.
So I would go on. I think it's a great answer, and it's true to what you want to do and the driving you want. For me, the two cars, and they're probably just falling out of that price bracket. I still think you could probably get a Ropey 911 for that. You could get a 65 car, and I love driving them, and they're so eligible because you can also do road events, which would be interesting. And I think could you get an Alpha GTA for that money yet, or have they gone beyond it?
250. You could get one. You're not going to get one with period race history, auto delta, and That's now it's unfathomable, isn't it, to say that starts at $400,000 now.
What? I mean, I can't. Yeah. I hate to say it.
But there's lots of cars on those grids that don't cost that much. A little teaser or something like that.
A teaser. I'm biased here because I sold one last year. But for me, that's the bargain of the century because they're so rare. I think they only made 150 proper teasers. They're brilliant to drive. But the first time I was very kindly invited to share with Adrian Van Hooydonk, who I think has come under a bit of a hard time from you lot about the size of his front grille design on the modern BMWs. But he's a lovely guy, and we're good mates. And he invited me to share his BMW 1800 teaser last year here at the Revival. And I'd never done the what's it called, the St Mary's Trophy before, and not done that, and not had that tin top experience. And the first time I pulled out the pit lane on a test, I just sighed, and I was like, "Oh, this is so crap." And the car just felt like a tin can, and there was no grunt. You could have got out and pushed it faster until it comes on cam in the final 1,000 revs, and it wakes up and it comes alive. And then you think, okay, now we're moving a bit. But the first 2-3 laps, you're still using the brakes. No, don't use the brakes.
Yeah.
And basically don't lift. And the speed that I realise you can carry through the corner, you just sort of put it up over the curb slightly on 2 wheels. This beautifully easy, balanced 4-wheel drift. And it was one of the most fun things I've ever done on 4 wheels.
It's like that Mini, with the low-powered cars around here, that Mini I drove. You brake at the chicane, and then the next time you touch the brake is the left at St Mary's. But even then, it's just a brush. It's not a stop. It's just a suggestion to get the car turned for that left.
The brake pedal becomes a sort of a direction-changing tool rather than a deceleration tool.
And weirdly, the muscle memory of driving the car. I don't know about you, but during the race, you're probably bracing yourself with your left leg anyways. You're bracing the left leg, and your right leg's just furiously at the throttle. Yeah. At times, your foot says, "Where is the brake?" You can sometimes find it. Down the back straight, I sometimes have I get my left foot off the brake just to check. Yeah. Oh, it's there. Yeah. Because you so infrequently use it that you forget where it is.
Do you get this thing? I've noticed it lately. It's really weird and it's a bit scary. Do you get this slightly like lazy foot syndrome where you almost can't be bothered to get off the throttle?
Yeah.
It's a weird thing.
But also when you get very confident in a car's handling, you think, well, what would happen? Yeah. And you'll just leave it pinned. Yeah. Because quite often these old cars have got such a lovely on-limit behaviour that nothing too spiteful is going to happen if it's too fast. So you just think, well, I'll stick with it. Yeah. And then you're quite right. You think, well, I'll just leave it there.
I often wonder, that Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours to achieve mastery at any particular pursuit concept. I wonder if at the ripe old age of 39, having done this for 30 years, if I'm finally getting up to that point where, whilst I will always evade mastery by a million miles, it's something you reach a comfort level with, and it starts to slow down a little bit, and then you start to think, okay. I mean, there's still quick cars that scare the life out of me, but a lot of the historic stuff just starts to feel a bit slower and very comfortable, and it's just this. I don't know. I find myself just a bit lazy getting off the throttle.
You're in the Matrix mode, aren't you? You can sort of see it all happening in front of you.
What I find very interesting is if I spend a lot of time driving historic cars, I become quite sniffy about new cars, right? And I celebrate everything about them, and I love the way they move. I love the way they communicate. I love the sound, the look, everything about them is more appealing than a modern racing car. Yeah. And you actually, and they flatter you, and you start to drive them okay, and they slide around, and you think, oh, I'm all right at this. Yeah. And then you jump in a GT3 car, and it hammers you. Yeah. Because it's so unforgiving. A modern racing car with a spec tyre is an unforgiving beast, and the margins on which you're judged are so much finer. Yeah. And I actually think it's a really good thing to get in new cars quite regularly, definitely. Just to remind yourself that there's an accuracy level in a new car that is completely missing in an old car. Yeah. You can make, in an E-Type here, you can make 4 or 5 mistakes a lap, and it might cost you a tenth. Yeah. It really won't have a profound effect on the lap time. But in a modern racing car, if you did that, you'd lose a second probably.
Well, in Blancpain, that's the difference between being in the top 10 or outside the top 50.
Yeah, you just get hammered. But I do love the options under power in these old racing cars. It's just, I mean, here we haven't been here for ages. You come here a lot more than me, but you come over to start finish straight the first time at Goodwood, and you got that right-hander at Madrid. Yeah. The first time you just suggest the thing right, and then you go over the lump, and then it just starts to oversteer on the exit, and you just think, this is fantastic.
Yeah. So it is, and the lovely thing about that is the people on the grass bank watching on the outside as you drive through Madgwick can see what you're experiencing and loving. Yeah. But in a GT3 car, that skill set that you've just described is, I would argue, actually, it's even harder to achieve. Maybe, but a lot harder to achieve. But it's invisible to the spectator, and that's a real shame.
It is, and there's no fix for that. And there's sadly there's no appreciation for some of the precocious talent that's out there. Because it's not easy to see the way that they work the balance of performance. Yeah. A really good driver will do me by a second a lap. But to the naked eye, that's not much. Yeah. But I can tell you, I can't do what they do. Yeah. And sadly, they're judged on making fewer mistakes. That's the way it works in modern motorsport, isn't it? Because everyone knows what the car's capable of. Yeah. And most people can get very close to it, but they just do it lap after lap after lap, and you just see them in the rearview mirror. I can remember vividly being down at Rickard this year and just being this thing creeping up on me, and I'm thinking, it can't be catching
What are
me
you
at that
doing
rate.
that I'm not doing?
What are you doing?
Yeah.
And then they just creep away from it, and you watch their their positioning of the car is just that much better. They are better drivers than you.
I know. I have this conflicting desire. I miss modern racing so much, and I'm desperate to get back behind the wheel of something. But at the same time, I'm conflicted in that because I pretty much know I'm going to get found out very, very quickly. And
well, they're also they're young. We're not, you can't forget that we're age ravaged now, and they're in them so often. It's all about seat time.
Yeah,
you'll find between races they've had 10 days in a sim or doing this and that, and I've been in the pub. Frankly,
I had a really illuminating conversation with Stuart Hall, who's a professional racing driver, mate of mine, and he's done a lot in modern racing. Very, very quick driver, and he slightly suffers what many pros that coach do, which is you don't really get much seat time. And this year, the guy he's coaching is doing GT3, and so on the one hand, it's brilliant for him. And he was saying, I just love being back in modern racing, love the intensity, I love the cars. But Christ, we were at Paul Ricard, and I went out and I thought I strung together a pretty good lap. I was 1.3 seconds off pole or whatever it was, but I was 52nd on the grid.
Yeah.
And it's like, Jesus.
No, the margins are... the margins are difficult to comprehend, but that's what they should be. Right. I think we'll draw that one to a close there. It's been fascinating speaking to you and Edward as well. So one thing I want to announce there, I'm quite a busy bloke, and Edward's quite a busy bloke as well. And I apologise for the frequency of these. When we started doing this, Edward said, we'll make it, this is my impression of Edward, we're going to make it weekly. And I said, no, we won't, because it's impossible, because I just haven't got the time. Well, we will. Well, I'm sure we'll make it happen. But it hasn't been weekly, and I apologise. And it probably won't be weekly going forwards. But it's still a nice free thing for you guys to enjoy. But I can't do them all, because I'm running around a bit. And I thought, and Edward thought, that Sam is the perfect person to take...
only one of the three that is not busy.
No, he's not. He's busy, but he's a bit more UK based.
He's got a face for radio.
Yeah. And
I knew someone was going to say.
So Sam is going to take the reins when I'm not about, and that'll help us just broaden the subject material a bit, and we'll help discover some more people you've never heard of and some other great stories. So. I look forward to, that's not mean I'm going away. I'm still going to be doing loads, but with Sam's input as well, I think we can do more. But that's been really great talking to you. So best of luck with whoever you talk to, and I'm sure we'll do double headers with another victim as well at some point.
I better get another mic.
Yeah, you better buy another microphone. So
before we go, I've got to do a plug.
Go on then.
First of all, next week when this goes live, so whatever it is, the 4th or 5th of September.
Yeah.
There'll be a few days left of a Chevrolet Camaro Z28 on our auction platform, www.collectingcars.com. Chris, what is a Z28 like?
Z28, it's a great car. Particularly fine example, that one. 2 owners, second of which was someone called Chris Harris from the Bristol area. So that particular vehicle I love it, but I haven't got a place for it at the moment. I've got a few cars. I intended to do no miles on it at all. I bought it with 200 miles on the clock 3 years ago. It's done 7,000 now. It is an unrepeatable car. Anyone that's sniffy about American muscle cars and what they're capable of on a track needs to drive that thing. It's got so much character as well. So what I drove one in 2014. GM bought one over here. This is an amazing end to the podcast. He starts another story.
That's right.
But very quickly, that GM bought one over, and I was a bit sniffy about it because it had done the usual Nürburgring lap time, and I just thought it was a load of crap. And the base car was so average. It was basically a Pontiac that had been purloined from a Holden. It was basically a Monaro shell. And I just thought, I'm tired of this. This is rubbish. And we had a 997 GT3 RS, which I got along just to demonstrate how far off the Americans were. And the Camaro was probably more fun on the day. I couldn't believe how good it was.
Wow.
So they used the buying power of GM to buy a parts set that you couldn't get unless you had that buying power. So it's got full Brembo ceramic brakes. It's got massive wheels. They had an understeer issue, so they just stuck a 305 section front tyre on it, so it turns in like nothing else. Wow. Means it tramlines a bit on UK roads. But it's got an LS7 in it. It's got a 7-litre motor, which is unstressed. We've got some titanium bits in there, so it revs to 7, but it's done by about 6.2 really in terms of power. But it's got a manual gearbox, 3 pedals, 4 seats, ceramic brakes, and it's trackable. There is no other car that can do that. So, literally last year, I did drop my kids off at school, go and do a track day, spend a day driving around the UK and collect them again. You can't do that in any other car. And it's most muscle cars you have to apologise for because they're actually crap. dynamically, but they're dripping with character. The Z28 has got the muscle car character, but dynamically stacks up. Yeah, it tramlines a bit, and the interior looks like it was made by a 4-year-old, all the usual stuff. But it's a really interesting car. And if you're into interesting cars and you like to get noticed, because God does it get some attention, then it's worth looking at. And obviously I'm involved in this collecting cars thing, and I just thought it'd be great to stick it on the website and see if anyone wants to buy it.
Well, thank you. Plug over.
Okay. And we'll see you soon. Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you, Edward.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.